Right, so going through, I'm going to call it metabolism metrics. So if we look at what is the metabolism and exactly how do we measure it and why is that relevant. So I'll take you guys through step by step. First of all, I guess we need to understand as a PT, why would we want to measure metabolism? I think for most of us in the room it's pretty clear, but just in case we're not, realistically we need to be able to predict the necessary calories for a person. Right? Like if we're going to help them with food, it's one thing to have recommended intake, but exactly what that contributes to in terms of calories, we can't espouse a weight loss goal or stabilise weight or gain weight unless we know exactly what calories someone needs. Calories is going to be relevant to metabolism. Is that simple enough? Yep, we're all on the same page there. So the proper calculation of energy demands for exercise and training related goals makes it a lot harder because a lot of the problem we've got is there's a lot of equations out there. So there's around about now 40 something, and there's about 6 different authors. Of that, 3 of them are our main head spinners. Of all those equations, there's so much variance. So for the exact same person, we could have one metabolic reading of 1800 kilocalories, and we can have another one that goes up to 3200. And the difference is, until you actually know what the equation is and why it's relevant, you know, one might be taking into account exercise demands, one is just calculating BMR, but if you were to look them up, they all say basal metabolic rate equation. So it's really, really hard to know what is accurate. We'll go through exactly what that means, why it is, and then probably based on my research and also not even me now, 2 of the leaders in the game of research have just brought out a really, really great simple equation which they reckon averages out everything, and it's simple. So we'll go through that at the end. In terms of then, where did it come from? Back in 1919, if that's going to upload. Back in 1919, Harrison Benedict came up with the first comprehensive equation to determine basal metabolic rate. Why was it relevant? Back then, you know, in the First World War, they needed to know how many calories to put soldiers on. So they needed to know if they were going to put food provisions for soldiers, how much food did they actually need to be able to feed them. So that's really relevant because if they've got people who are physically, you know, in the fields who need a certain amount of energy, if they can't eat enough food and they can't sustain it, they've got a big problem. Yeah, it's going to be one of those days. Yeah, so if they don't know exactly how much food to give them, then they can't feed them, they can't sustain them. So in terms of life sustainability, it was really important that they knew exactly how much food to give them. Harrison Benedict came up with the first equations. Those are still used to this day. So people still use Harrison Benedict. To give you an idea, you know, they're outdated by almost 100 years. So if people are using them, there's a reason why they're not accurate anymore. We've come a long way in science. If we look at a quick timeline of where it came from, 1915 and 1919, the first equation was formed. Between 1920 and 1950, we then started determining the accuracy of body weight and gender for a measure of BMR. So the very, very first equation was pretty much based on very, very small sample sizes and predominantly for males. So it was entirely relevant for soldiers how much food they need. Between 1920 and 1950, the science expanded, and now we're actually incorporating gender as a measure, and it makes sense. Girls don't need as many calories as boys. And also, you know, body weight is the main measure, so not just kind of looking at you're a male of a certain height. They really didn't take into account weight at the start either. Between 1950 and 1977, they then started assuming that, well, now that we can measure how much body fat someone has, so we can measure lean mass, you know, adipose tissue isn't highly metabolic, it doesn't use a lot of calories. It does use calories, but definitely not a lot. So they started to use lean mass and age as determinants of BMR. So it dramatically changed the game because now 2 people at 100 kilos were not comparable. It really came back to what is their lean mass, and their lean mass determines exactly how many calories they'll need. Between 1980 and 2000, so not onwards, but 1980 and 2000, the refinement of those equations became based on the accuracy of baseline measures. So the equations pretty much stayed the same. They just started really refining exactly what they were using as far as you know, our measures of how we could actually measure lean mass improved. So we went away from just kind of surface area measures of skin folds, and then we came up with things like bod pods so we could do surface area. We had dunk tanks. We then went on to DEXA scans. So the amount of accuracy of measuring lean mass has dramatically improved. Therefore, they were starting to reformulate these equations. The other thing as well, you know, back in the early days of measuring metabolism, they were really going on just changing weight. So if they fed people a certain amount, You know, if they had sustainable energy, theoretically, they would either gain weight or lose weight, right? Very, very simple. Now, we can put people in a bariatric compartment, so we can measure exact oxygen intake and carbon dioxide manufacturing, or carbon dioxide respiration. They can also measure you know, defecation energy, so they can take someone's poo, basically, and measure exactly how many calories are left in it, based on the food they're ingesting and the amount they're defecating, as well as urine analysis to look at what amino acids are out. They can actually tell exactly, almost to the calorie, exactly what someone's burning. So it's a lot more accurate in terms of knowing that. They're not going to do that for tens of thousands of people. All they needed to do it for is take maybe small samples and look at, based on old equations, measure them on what they would be for that, and compare that to how would these people compare in new measures, and then just refine them a little bit. And that was simple enough. So, what we ended up with, this was probably mid-70s. Base metabolic rate in terms of calories per day was 501.6. Minus plus 21.6 times by lean body mass. So if we had, say, John, and John is got 74 kilos of lean mass, he is then 501.6 plus 21.6 times by 74. Someone want to add that up on the calculator for me? I think it's about 22, let's say 22 something or other. So based on that, you know, his basal metabolic rate, what he needs on a daily basis, is around about 2,200 calories. Fair enough? And that was kind of taking into account, you know, if you distribute it across gender. So there is other equations that take gender into account. Moving forward, the most accurate equations to date, we had three main players in the game. They were Harris and Benedict, and those guys kept going. They didn't stop in the 1920s, they went all the way into the 30s and 40s. Mifflin, St. Jean, and Schoenfeld. Schoenfeld is actually still really, really popular because these guys were some of the first people to actually take into account energy demands. So very quickly they started going, it's not just about how much energy someone needs to survive. How do we actually feed athletes? How do we feed people who are doing more than just, you know, they're doing more than living? And Mifflin St. Jean was the most accurate for general BMR for obese and non-obese. So of these three equations, Harrison Benedict is the most simple. Mifflin St. Jean was the most appropriate for someone who's not training, and Schoenfeld became the most accurate for someone who was moving as an athlete, and we needed to figure out what their training demands are. As a result, in our field, most people will always use Schoenfeld. It's not a singular equation, there are quite a few, so depending on male, female, age, or other things. But of that, if you were to go online and use a calculator and you don't know these equations, you've got NFI, you've got no idea exactly which equation that might be, and you don't know the relevance. So if you were to use Harrison Benedict, you're not actually going to get an accurate measure for what your client needs. If you were to use Mifflin St. Jean, that's great. You know exactly what they need to just live each day, but you don't know what they need to perform and to keep up with your training demands. So Schoenfeld is probably your easiest go-to. In saying that, there's other ways to work around it. So the most accurate one to date then is, if we're looking at a male, so same male, 9.99 times by 74 plus 6.25 times by height, so let's say he's 181 centimetres. Wow, technology just hates me. Minus 4.92 times by age, so let's say he's 28, plus 5. So if that was the same guy, let's do some maths for a second. So 501.6 plus 21.6 times by 74. So this was bang on 2100. Here we've got so we've got 739 plus 1131 minus 137 plus 5 So in 30 years, that change from the same person was around about almost 400 calories difference in resting metabolic rate. So we're talking a huge error of variance here. There is a lot of inaccuracy, and that was deemed in a literature review to be the most accurate at the time. So then we got to the early 2000s and everything changed. Now we actually had some big institutions actually come in and look at doing things in a lot better way. The American Institute of Medicine, which isn't the best place in the world, but it's still good, what they ended up doing was they really came to the table and said, let's come up with a better way of factoring in all the different people. Sorry, bear with me guys. These guys then came up with 17 different equations. So they came up with ones for every different age group, every different gender, and also pregnant versus non-pregnant. So they started taking into account that if someone's lactating or if they're pregnant and have a growing organism inside of them, that their energy demand is going to be very, very different. The good thing about this was it started to become highly accurate, but it means for us, in order to determine who we would even what measures we might use, you would have to go and find the right equation for that person, for that demographic. If you were going to do it, if you want to be highly accurate, this has been the most accurate one to date. But there is 17 different equations, so you need to know which one you're looking for of that. But they're quickly available. If you just Google Institute of Medicine and Metabolism, you'll find websites where they incorporate that. And then you've just got to find which one is the right equation and plug that in. It takes into account some energy expenditure stuff, but it's still, there's always that margin of error. And I'm zooming through this stuff because I want to get on to my opinion of things as well. So if we get on to 2015 now, we've come a huge way in 5 years. In fact, our whole industry has turned upside down in 5 years. There's been so much more money and investment on actually looking at these things because there's been a lot more interested parties in terms of research from big pharma, big food companies, and also in terms of spend in our sport, there's a lot more. So if we look at metabolic rate as 4 different things, a lot of the science and research has been looking at just 2 things, which is basal metabolic rate and the thermic effect of activity. So, what's happening in terms of this is daily survival, this is the amount of calories that I burn in daily survival, and this is the amount of calories burned from activity. But there's more to it than that. There's also the fact that, every time you eat food, you have a loss of energy to digest that food, and it varies depending on how much of that is solid food versus liquid, the components of that food. So if you were to live on an entirely, say, 1800 calories of glucose energy, you have very, very little thermic effect of feeding, but you do have a high energy burn, so you generate a lot of heat. So you might get, say, 6% there. If you've got a really high protein, high fibre diet, so it's really hard to digest, but you don't have a lot of heat production from that food, you might have, say, 8.5%. If you've got a high protein, high fibre diet with a large degree of starchy carbs, you might get 12%. So it all compounds, but it means there's definitely an effect of thermic feeding here, which can be anywhere from 5 to 10%. Most experts tend to think it sits around the 10% mark. So the food you're eating is burning calories every day to the point of around about 10% of your daily intake. Then you've got the training effect. That can be anywhere from 10% to 50% for an elite athlete. So if your basal metabolism was 1700 calories, or what's this guy, 1738, if he was a highly developed athlete, he may need another, I don't know, say 650 plus calories every day just for his training demands. So it changed that. And then we've got, well, I contend this, but we've got our non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So things like caffeine. If you had caffeine and it boosts your metabolism, you might get 2% from that. And also your spontaneous physical activity, meaning your non-measurable stuff. If you walked up 10 flights of stairs a day, and that's contested at between, say, 1 to 4%. So combined together then, most equations are going to pitch us down here, and it's really, really hard to take into context all these demands. So you don't necessarily know exactly what that case is going to be. Then if we're looking at it in terms of, so I'm just going to deviate away from the slideshow for a minute. Alan Aragon and Lyle McDonald, who are, these guys are probably they're not the leading researchers, but they're the leading reviewers in this field. How good is that? That's totally readable. Make it simple. What they started doing is they had an equation. The simple equation was, let me pull it up. So 25.3 times by lean mass. So what's that? So if we had the same guy, work that out for me, 25.3 times by 74. So working out resting, so basal metabolic rate around about 1872. And then an energy expenditure factor on top of that. So then you're looking at around about a multiplier. So by 0.1 for low-level athletes, by 0.2 for intermediates, by 0.3 to 0.5 for your events, which means that might be 1 to 2 days per week, that might be 2 to 3 at a moderate intensity, that might be 3 to 5, and then scaling up depending on intensity. So still an error of variance. Let's look at the difference here then. If you times that, so we've got 1872 calories, right? If we take 1872 and we times that by 1.1, we've got 2059 times by 1.2, 2264, sorry, 2246. Two, 4, 3, 3, 2, 2808. So here we've got a guy, 74 kilos lean mass, basal metabolic rate of 1872 with an exercise index activity factor of around about 2059 to 2808. Now I've got plenty of clients currently training with me who have around about, say, 74 to 76 kilos lean mass, who are eating in excess of 3,500 calories. According to this, they should be gaining weight at a rate of knots. So even in the science, there's still so much error, but this is assuming that we know nothing else about this person. And this is where a lot of PTs get caught, because we get caught up in the mathematics of it, and we can definitely calculate out, this is the minimum that person needs for survival. We can never really go below this. If you go below this, you're actually starving out their organs. So you may be thinking that you're trying to burn fat, but you're actually depriving the most bioactively tissue in the body, which is your organ tissue, of necessary energy. Which means if you've got someone, let's say that it was a girl, and their calorie came to, say, 1280, and you've got them eating less than 1280 calories, they're actually depriving themselves of energy they need for survival function. It's not about starving fat at that point in time. So you've made a grievous error. Even with these factors combined, if you've got that person training 5 times a week, an activity factor of 0.5 still might mean that person's really on 1,600 calories. Yet I've got plenty of girls who are on 2,400 calories. So where's the error there? So if you guys change it, there's a lot of maths here, and you can definitely work out what is the baseline that I need. There's just a much simpler way. If you guys are trying to work out what you can currently do with a client and how you might measure or change that, if you've got all these factors combined together, a person, when you start working with them, is going to be eating a certain amount of food. Most people have a habit, right? They're typically eating fairly similar. They may deviate in terms of day to day, but over the course of a week, they will eat a certain amount. So if you had day 1, 2, 3, just take a food diary for a whole week. And if you look at the calories, so let's say it's a guy and he's got 2,400 one day, he's got 2,800 another day, he's got 27, 22, 27, 26, 3,000. 37 days. If you took that, and if that's what he's eating and his weight is staying the same, if you added all that together and divide it by 7, you're going to get an average, right? So let's say that average is 2,650. we can assume that his adaptive metabolism, so let's put a different terminology to this, his adaptive metabolism is 2,650 calories, meaning that his survival threshold for him staying exactly the same is 2,650. So if we want to calibrate his weight up or down, we can calibrate off that number. We don't have to go off this. We can assume that scientifically this is his baseline metabolism, and yes, there's an activity factor and all the rest, but the fact is he's already eating something else, and he's already adapted to something else, and even in terms of his mitochondria, so the thing that is changing in his muscle, how much energy he burns, has already adapted to a certain amount. What we can do though is we can manipulate this so we can change exactly how many calories he's having. So if we want him to lose weight, we can adapt down from that, right? If we want him to gain weight, we can boost up from that. Generally speaking, it's going to take a certain threshold, so it might take 100 calories above that for him to gain weight. It might take 50 calories below that for him to lose weight. It's up to us to actually measure and calibrate. So if you're measuring someone's weight and measuring their skin folds and you've made changes in their calories, if you can't see a change, you need to go further. If you can see a change, you're on track, right? The other things we can change is thermic effective feeding. So if he was eating entirely processed starchy food, and let's say we wanted to cut out calories, but we don't want to take away too much because we don't want to leave him starving, we could put in more whole food, not because we necessarily believe that he has to have that for some reason, because that science has been proved false, but just so he feels more full and his thermic effective feeding elevates. So you can be a little bit tricky by manipulating that. So you may take whey protein and replace it with meat, not because there's magically something better than meat, but he's going to feel fuller and his thermic effective feeding is going to rise, so he's going to get a slight boost of metabolism. 2%, while it may not seem a lot, is still in this case 45 calories. So he's still going to burn an extra 45 calories a day. So you can make some changes there, but if you want to make your life really, really simple, you don't have to do this. You can definitely get online. I like to find out where someone is, because if someone is below this line, what do you think the implications are for someone? So if someone, let's say this is John, and his baseline is 1850, and he's been crash dieting for 2 years, let's say he's lost 20 kilos, and he's really happy, but now his training's not progressing, he's not losing any more weight, so he's come to us for us to help him, and he's only living on 1,600 calories a day. He's actually in a deficit of 250 calories, right? So if I go and calculate out what his basal metabolism should be, it's not, obviously, but what it should be, he is living on 1,600 calories and training, say 5 days a week doing that, his metabolism is out of whack. It is just gone. So a simple way of actually looking at it now is saying, okay, well, let's look at, again, the maths. So if we've got, across weekly total calories in, so if he's got, like I said before, 2,400, 2,800, 2,700, 2,200, and let's say that that averaged out to 2,650 per day. If the calories out are a combined total, there's equations out there to work out exactly how much energy someone should be burning per session of things. So if he's got 4 weight sessions for 45 minutes, at his lean mass, it should be around about probably 375 calories per session, plus then say a total of 60 minutes steady state cardio, so approximately another say 550 for his lean mass. If that's the case, then we've got 4 by 375, so let's say 1,500 just to round it off, so approximately 2,000 calories per week out. What's that times by 7, so around about. So now we've got a balance. Let's say, no, I haven't added these up, but let's say he's got a total in for the week of 18,000 minus 2,000 is 16,000, right? Is that simple enough? Divide that by 7, and we've got what his true BMR is. So if this was with activity, and that was his BMR, we can work out what that is by taking away the activity. So if you want to know where someone is, work out their weekly total in, work out their weekly total out, subtract it, divide it by 7, you've got an approximation of their daily BMR. And if that's below what it should be, so if that's below a good equation, then you've got an issue. That's a real selling point for someone. If I was working with this guy, and let's say it was well below what a BMR equation should be, if I had to go to this person, okay, look, the predicament you're in, the reason why you're not losing any more weight even though you're training a lot and you're eating really clean is because your metabolism has dwindled down and we need to find ways to get this back up. And then you're going to have to get in the science. They can't do that on their own. So, I mean, that's a whole other talk, but in terms of what we can provide for this person, mathematically you can prove very, very simply in front of them. You can do it by pen in front of them on paper. And if you were using that equation, so again, just a simple one, and this was probably deemed the simplest and most accurate. So let me pull it up again. I think it's 25.3, yeah. So, is that easy enough? So 25.3 times by lean body mass. Lyle McDonald goes on to clean it up just a little bit and changes it to incorporate an age factor, but the difference was maybe 3%. So in terms of, it extends out the equation quite long and gives you a 3% difference. If you're trying to do it on the spot and just work out something really close enough to good enough that you can work this out for a client, 25.3 times by lean body mass in kilos is going to give you an approximate metabolism of where it should be. What the metabolism actually is what they're eating minus what they're training, and then you can calibrate from there. What you may also do then is if you really wanted to make nutrition that is geared towards performance, if we've got someone and it's a weight loss goal and we've got them training 4 days a week, what days do they need more calories than others? Training days, right? So you may have a calorie allowance that sits on their BMR for non-training days, and you may have calorie levels that sit well above that for training days. So that way they're still going to lose weight, but they've got the energy demands available for training. Great athletes always do it. They super compensate calories for an impending performance. But if we've got someone who's got a weight loss goal at the same time, you can do that. But if you don't know that BMR, where do you even start? Does that make sense, guys? So the simplest method, without getting too heavy into the science and without spending hours and hours going backwards over it, is a sum total of what they're eating. This is assuming that their weight is stable. So if you ask a client, has your weight changed in the last 4 months? And if it hasn't, you know, we might say 3 months or 2 months, but if they're fairly consistent with their daily intakes and they haven't changed weight, and if they're fairly consistent with their training and they haven't changed weight, you've got a true BMR. You know exactly that case because they're not changing, therefore they're not above or below. And ideally, obviously you want some consistency between this because there's a lot of variation, but you could then make it train versus non-train. Are we all on the same page? Right, cool.